So Colossal Biosciences, their whole marketing pitch is, hey, we're going to bring back the woolly mammoth by 2028.
Cool.
They created the woolly mouse, and now they're claiming that they created a dire wolf.
Yeah.
Do you agree with them that they actually did create a dire wolf because they used a hound as the surrogate mother, and they took, I believe what they said they did was they took DNA from a fossil of the dire wolf and then edited some of the genes on it, put it in a wolf surrogate mother, and now they have it in this facility. Does that meet your requirement, would you say, for de-extincting?
Well, I would say it's a step in the right direction. Now, I'm not a geneticist, and so I'm not competent to have a fully formed opinion here. My understanding is that they made edits on 14 different genes. And I've seen this criticized. I've seen them get some pushback by saying that, just because you took a canid and then edited 14 of its genes, that doesn't give you a true dire wolf genome. But at a minimum, what it does give you is something that's a lot more like a dire wolf than modern canids are. And so I would say if they don't have a full dire wolf, they at least have a step in the right direction, and it could be further refined with additional genetic work.
And I was really struck when watching, they did a CBS interview in the Time article with the provocative picture title with extinct with a red line through it. They used a lot of moral language. Like we have a moral obligation to bring back species that they were saying we caused to go extinct. Would you go that far? Would you say we do have a moral obligation to do this?
No, I wouldn't. Obligation, the way I use the term, is a pretty strong term. And as distinct from it being a good thing to do. Something may be a good thing to do without one being obligated to do it. And so I would say it's a good thing to do, all things being considered, assuming nothing else is affecting the situation. I'd say it's a good thing to bring back creatures that humanity caused the extinction of. I could see exceptions to that, where reintroducing a creature that had gone extinct under humanity could cause problems, and the problems might be worse than leaving the situation alone. So I can see situations where you should not bring something back. But on balance, I'd say it's a good thing, but it also has a cost involved because there are costs to everything you do in life. And, as Thomas Sowell says, economics is the study of limited resources with alternative uses. So if you're going to have to devote resources to bringing back extinct creatures and those resources have alternative uses, then it becomes an economic question of what should we spend these resources on. I don't have any problem with spending resources on de-extincting animals. I think that's fine, but it needs to be considered within the mix of competing uses for the same resources. And I think that takes this out of the category of obligation and puts it into the category of things that might be good to do, but that we're not strictly obligated to do.
Gotcha. But before we get to that, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's episode, University of Dallas. In a world where people can often feel alone or like nothing really matters, the University of Dallas is different. It's a place where students build strong friendships, grow in their faith, and work hard to learn important things, all while searching for truth, wisdom, and goodness. University of Dallas alumnus Brian Birch is responding to this quest in an extraordinary way. Donald Trump has nominated him as ambassador to the Holy See. The University of Dallas applauds Brian for his personal witness, advocacy, and great work that he has been called to do. Learn more about Brian's alma mater, the University of Dallas, and join the fellow alumni praying for him during his ongoing nomination process by clicking the link below. And that brings up an interesting point too, because there's investors like Tom Brady involved, celebrities, and they've made these splashy promises, say the woolly mammoth, to bring back for presumably entertainment purposes. I'm not sure exactly what part of the ecosystem, say, a woolly mammoth would take at this point. Do you see a difference in if this was purely an entertainment project to bring back exotic animals, or if they had a good case for we need to bring back, for example, I think they cloned the red wolf 4 times because it was a necessary part of an ecosystem, or so they say, Do you see a difference in the entertainment versus necessity angle here?
Well, yeah. And the Tasmanian tiger is similar. Thylacines were a key component of the ecosystems in which they existed. And when you pull them out of the ecosystem, which humans did over the course of the 19th and the early 20th century, it leads to imbalances that affect other populations in the same ecosystem. So if you're reintroducing an animal in order to fix a problem in an ecosystem, that's one thing. If you're doing it just for human entertainment, that's another thing. I would say there's more of an obligation if you're bringing it back to fix an ecosystem than if you're just doing it for human entertainment. But I don't think there's anything wrong with human entertainment. And so as long as the animals are treated humanely, even if you're building, Jurassic Park or Mammoth Park or whatever it is, I don't see a fundamental problem with that.
Specifically,
on the other hand, I'd love to have woolly mammoths roaming Siberia again.
That would be quite a visual.
They actually survived on an island between Alaska and Siberia for hundreds of years into human history. I think it was sometime in the Middle Ages when they finally went extinct.
Wow.
But the last woolly mammoths suffered from island dwarfism, which is a condition that develops when an organism is confined to a resource poor environment like an island. It can't get as many calories, and so it tends to shrink. And even humans suffer from the equivalent of island dwarfism in some cases. That's why people can be pygmies and so forth. So the final woolly mammoths were actually dwarf mammoths. So they weren't that big, but they were apparently woolly.
And do we know that just because of dating, like archaeological dating?
Yeah.
Okay. So no human, I guess potentially a human could have interacted with them, but not likely.
Yeah. Well, no, humans may have interacted with them. It's just that it was in a very remote area. And I don't know that there were humans on the island. I haven't researched that. Humans definitely interacted with regular woolly mammoths back when they were part of the megafauna in the old world. And my understanding is our ancestors hunted them, and between climatic changes and other factors and human predation, our ancestors played a role in the original extinction of the megafauna that appeared in the parts of the world where we encountered megafauna.
So back to the genetic engineering front, we have done genetic engineering now for our food, actually for a little while now, for now animals. So specifically with cloning the red wolf or in the dire wolf example, are you concerned with the potential application for genetic engineering when it comes to humanity? In terms of, I see things like orchid, which they're testing embryos for genetic problems or deficiencies, and so they're kind of choosing in that regard. Like, are you concerned with, is there a difference to you of if it's done on food, animals, and then humans? Are you concerned with the jump off point?
Well, the problem is not with genetic engineering itself. We've been doing that even before we knew about genes. Genes are a fairly recent discovery in the history of science, but we've been doing genetic modification all the way through human history. We've done it with plants. We've bred wheat, for example, to be more productive so we can get more grain out of the wheat that we're growing. We've been doing it with livestock. I mean, dogs are genetically modified wolves. So we've been doing genetic modifications through selective breeding all the way through history. If you come up with a way, like a gene editor like CRISPR, so that you can do it quickly, that doesn't fundamentally change what you're doing. It's still genetic modification. So the question then becomes, are you introducing positive or negative modifications into an organism's genome? And that's going to depend on a case-by-case basis. Some things you can do to a genome are going to help the organism or help human needs. Others are going to be harmful to the organism or harmful to human needs. And then the second issue is the organism you're doing this to, are you doing anything to the organism that is itself immoral? So in the case of humanity, I would say that using genetic modification to cure a genetic disease is just fine. You know, if someone has sickle cell anemia and you're able to cure that disease, either in the organism itself or even in its germline, so the cure will be passed on to descendants, I think that that's in principle fine. But if you're making other modifications, like you're trying to breed a superhuman, I think that's something else. And you get into morally problematic territory there very quickly. Also, the kind of selection method that you were talking about, where you have a bunch of different embryos and then you select which ones are going to get to live, that is flatly immoral. Because in that case, you're creating humans, knowing that you're going to kill a bunch of them. And that's just flatly immoral.
Yeah. And that's, one of the main arguments against IVF, and the orchid technology utilizes IVF. Mm-hmm. There's no other way to do it. So the question is, now that these wolves are created, they are being kept in a secret sanctuary where people can't see them or interact with them.
Sounds cool, doesn't it? Secret sanctuary.
It does. I even heard the scientists talk. They're a little bit nervous to go near them because they don't react like traditional wolves, because they've been genetically bred to be different.
They're non-domesticated.
Yeah. So what would you say, is there a proper or ethical way to, now that we've created this new, not new, I guess de-extincted something to that extent, is there a way we should treat them?
Well, it sounds, from what I've read, it sounds like they're being pretty cautious and responsible. They haven't released them into the wild. They're keeping them under observation. They're watching to see what happens, like later in their lives. Will there be problems that manifest that aren't obvious initially? And those are responsible things to do, especially when you're at the early stages of a project and you don't know what its long-term consequences are going to be. It makes a lot of sense to me to say, well, if you're going to do this to organisms, you want to give them the kind of environment that they can live productively in. And apparently they've done that. It's not like they've got them in a cage somewhere. They've got them in this big area, and it's a wild area and so forth, but they're keeping them under observation. And all that's reasonable. I think unless you want to have these purely for, I guess you could call it entertainment value, that's a little bit of a simplistic term, because people don't just, go to zoos for entertainment value, but also educational value, and to appreciate, the natural world and things like that. And I wouldn't call education and appreciating nature to be entertainment exactly. So that's a little bit of an oversimplification, but I can't think of another better term that you can say quickly without having to unpack all of that.
Yeah.
But unless you're going to breed them purely for zoo value, let's say, then I think you'd want to release them into the wild long term. That's, sort of stage 2 de-extinction, where you get them back out into the natural environment. But that raises a whole bunch of questions. What are they going to do to the ecosystem if you let them go, if you have a stable breeding population of them? And that's something that I don't think we can know the answers to until after. If you think of what they're doing now as phase 0, they've made them, but they're keeping them under observation, and then using them as part of a live-in zoo. That would be kind of stage 1, because at least then they're getting to interact with the public in some way. And then stage 2 would be letting them loose into the wild to where they're not under direct human control. I think that you can't get to stage 2 in a responsible way until you've passed through stages 0 and stage 1. I think you have to spend time looking at this organism, observing the organism, experimenting with exposing it to other organisms and seeing what happens. Because since these organisms are extinct, and this is different than the Thylacine, because we at least know they used to exist in a recent environment.
Right.
But we don't, dire wolves have been extinct for much longer. And so we have less of a sense of what would happen with them, releasing them into a modern ecosystem. It could have negative unintended consequences. I think even with de-extinct thylacines, you'd need to pass through stage 0 and stage 1 as well. But especially for something that hadn't been alive in recorded human history, you definitely need to.
So I think there was another element to this too, is there was some Game of Thrones lore where the dire wolves they had that thick white coat. And if you actually go back to historically what a lot of people said they actually look like, they didn't look like that. So it was kind of a celebrity modification to maybe capture some public interest. And I'm sure these scientists are tired at this point of having the quote, yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they never stopped to think if they should.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying to me, what we've just talked about essentially is the plot of Jurassic Park, except they didn't intend to release them into the wild, but they escaped. And so
life finds a way.
Life does find a way. I guess in my head, I'm like, okay, we already have somewhat of a, in my mind, concerning cultural zeitgeist tendency of Colossal to try to capitalize on what interests people. And therefore, Jurassic Park, they wanted to bring back dinosaurs because that captured the interest of people. And so is there a line in your mind of, this is a private company. They can technically, I guess, do whatever they want. The public doesn't really have a ton of control as to whether or not this gets done. Is there a line of how far we go for entertainment value in your mind?
Well, yeah, anything that, even if entertainment value negatively impacts humanity, then it shouldn't be done. We don't have gladiatorial games today. Those killed people. And so there are definitely moral limits to entertainment. And if, you want to go watch Gladiator, okay, fine, but that's not the same thing as actually killing people in an arena. That's just pretend. And I'd say the same thing if you want to see dire wolves or tyrannosaurs or anything else. If it's going to negatively impact humanity, then let's keep it in the realm of pretend. Maybe make movies like Jurassic Park, but not actually have one.
Right.
But I think the criterion is, and where the line exists, since we're not talking about stage 2 now, we're not talking about releasing them into the wild, but just using them for human quote unquote entertainment. I would say if that negatively impacts humanity, either directly in terms of people getting eaten by tyrannosaurs or dire wolves, or if it negatively impacts humanity in the sense of it causes other problems like sucking up so many resources that, it leads to a famine in an area. Well, then I would say that that there is a line there, but how you adjudicate that line is something that has to be done by experience, and the market mechanism is the best system we figured out for adjudicating a lot of those issues about the best allocation of resources. So I wouldn't try to prejudge it and say, oh, well, you should use that money for this other thing. Well, maybe you should, but the market mechanism is the best way we have of sorting out those questions.
And this has just been kind of rolling in my mind since we started talking about genetic engineering in general. Your explanation of, we've essentially been doing this for a long time. I think when this article dropped, people instantly went to, it feels unnatural or maybe disrespectful to God is kind of a too simple a way of putting it. God's creation, maybe. So I think people get kind of squeamish about anything altering what is already naturally here. So what would you say to someone outside of, we've been doing this for a little bit, for a long time, just going further down the track of scientists so outwardly engineering things? Like, would you say the fears are justified? Would you say that this is actually a technological advancement that's co-creation, say, of God's creation? Like, I guess I'm just looking for maybe your perspective, on that entire situation.
Well, I'd say that I understand the concern, and I think it's a healthy concern to have. If you're talking about modifying the environment, that is something to be concerned about. And so I think the impulse is a good one. However, just because we have an impulse doesn't mean you run with it, because that's why God also gave us reason in addition to impulses. He made us stewards of the earthly environment. And so we can use our reason to try to navigate the issue of what modifications to the environment are permissible and what ones aren't. That's something that humans have been doing all the way down through human history, because everything humans do modifies the environment. You build a house, you've just modified the environment. So humans are environment modifiers, and God knew that when he created us, when he put us in the world, and it's part of why he gave us the gift of reason, so we could modify the environment in a reasonable way and serve as his stewards in it. One of the things that reason tells us is that what we see in the environment now is not what has always been. And so it would be a mistake, or what always will be. And so it would be a mistake to try to freeze the environment at a particular moment in history without respect to how the environment got here or where it's going to go. We're called to manage the process of the environment, not fossilize it at a particular moment in history. And so if we previously modified the environment such that, for example, dire wolves or thylacines went extinct, I would say it's a reasonable question for humans to consider. Maybe we should bring them back. Maybe we should revert the environment to be in more like what it used to be like. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. But I think it's a reasonable question. So even though there's a natural, healthy instinct to say, wait a minute, is what we're doing here okay? That's a good, healthy instinct, but it doesn't settle the question for us.
Right. And I think, different topic, but similarly related, a lot of people have fears about AI. It's kind of the new biggest. It's going to shoot us into this new era of information, and our jobs will change, our lives will change, and people kind of have that instinct fear of like, oh, no, we got to keep it here. So do you see that same approach taking place for, embracing AI or having that debate maybe?
In principle, I think the same I think the same set of principles applies. AI is a technology that would have profound impacts on the human race and on the world around us. And we don't want to get into a gray goo paperclip maker scenario. I think that there's even more reason for caution with AI than with de-extinction, though. Because even if you bring back dire wolves or woolly mammoths, or even if you somehow brought back a tyrannosaur or, a population of tyrannosaurs, they're not going to end humanity. But they may eat a few people, but they're not ending humanity. Yeah. Whereas AI has the potential to do that. And so I think we need to be even more careful with AI than with de-extinction.
How would you say AI has the potential to end humanity?
Oh, any number of ways. Setting off all the nuclear bombs in the world at once is just one obvious way. But there are lots more less obvious ways. And if we were able to build something that is smarter than us, which I don't know if that's possible, but if it is possible, it could think up if it's genuinely smarter than us, it could think up ways that we wouldn't be able to spot before they hit. And if it decides to do that, we likely wouldn't be able to figure it out in time to stop it. So I think we need to be extra careful. And I actually think that there is a strong case to make for putting firm guardrails on AI to prevent it from doing things that are not intended.
Which has already been appropriately covered by Terminator, Terminator 2, Terminator 3. So movies are ahead of the curve on all these things. Jimmy, one thing I'm just personally curious as listening to your stuff for a while, what inspired you to start the Jimmy Akin Mysterious World? Because you could have just stuck with Catholic Apologists. You're clearly very logical. I love hearing you think through things. But you're taking on, I was just going through, like, The Rapture was one of them, all the way to Zodiac Killer, what sparked your interest in how'd you get past the initial, like, I'm sure there was some criticism of, oh, you shouldn't be diving into that. That's probably unseemly or not Catholic. Like, what pushed you through that?
Well, so I guess there's sort of two questions here. One is, why did it start? And the reason it started is I'm just a curious guy. And I've always been intrigued with mysteries. I've always taken a broad approach to learning about different subjects, in part for the benefit of apologetics. You know, sometimes people ask me, have you read the latest apologetic book by so-and-so? And I'm like, no, I haven't, because I'm not interested in just recycling arguments that are already out there. I want to push the boundaries of apologetics by incorporating new data and new arguments that no one has ever heard before. So I read outside of apologetics in order to learn about other areas and then see what can be brought back in. But I'm just a curious guy. And a number of years ago, the StarQuest production network was looking to revitalize its line of podcasts, and we were having a brainstorming meeting about what kind of podcast should we do. And I said, well, I could hypothetically do one based on mysteries, and that caught on. And so I started doing it. There have been people, especially in the beginning, who, questioned, is this something an apologist ought to be doing? Instead of directly defending the Christian faith. And there are sort of, I think, two things that have helped overcome that. One of them is the fact that one of the things that Mysterious World does is soft evangelization. Because at least our rule is, we sometimes vary from the rule, but the rule is we look at a mystery, we give its background, and then we look at it from the reason perspective and say, what would reason tell us about this? And then we look at it from the faith perspective and say, what would the faith tell us about this? So that makes the show accessible to everybody, whether they're Christian or not, but it also incorporates the faith aspect of things. So it's kind of like come for the mysteries, stay for the faith perspective. Yeah. So it is doing a form of soft evangelization. The other thing that I think helped overcome this is mysteries are just compelling, and people thought it was cool to go through them and try to figure them out, because that's one of the things we do. I'm not interested in being like a lot of mystery-based shows where all they want to do is generate wonder and imagine what if. I want to know what's true. Right. And people saw the value in looking at other areas and, thinking about them. There's kind of an echo of this on Catholic Answers Live. One of the things that people noticed, on the radio listeners noticed on Catholic Answers Live, is I will answer any question straight. It does not matter. I never look down on a person for the question they asked. I never scoff at them or their question. I never dismiss it. I'll try to answer every question straight. And people notice that. And it's like, how far can we go with that? And they started asking deliberately weird questions, like, if you're a vampire, can you kill yourself to stop predating on other humans? Or if you have zombies, can you use them for slave labor or whatever? And I would take Catholic moral principles and apply them.
That's awesome.
So in the case of vampirism, you can never directly kill yourself, but fortunately, there are other solutions for a vampire besides killing yourself that will avoid predating on others, like using a blood bank or consuming blood from animals. In the case of zombies, you cannot use people for slave labor. That's dehumanizing. But you could use zombies who are capable of work for, like, sort of work rehabilitation therapy to help them make some contribution to society, so they're not just sitting around vegetating all the time. But I would take Catholic principles and apply them to these. And eventually they started doing shows called Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. And it kind of crosses over with Mysterious World, where we're using Catholic principles, or more broadly, Christian principles in general, to look at situations that are unusual and interesting.
Incredible. That's the best. So, of course, if people want to hear more of this, it's Jimmy Akin Mysterious World, correct?
Yeah, it's at mysterious.fm, like in FM radio. So, or you can go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy Akin.
Awesome. Yeah, and if we have more weird requests coming from the LOOPcast, I'll be calling you.
Yeah, no problem. Awesome. Always happy to talk.
Thanks, Jimmy.